Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology, and this video is called Getting Practical about Natal Astrology. So I did a Getting Practical about horary, electional, and now I'm going to do natal. So when we talk about natal astrology, basically for most people, natal astrology means looking at the birth chart of a person, and that is astrology. I mean, that's the be-all and end-all. There's nothing other than that. And from the perspective of medieval Renaissance astrology, that's a bit like a carpenter with just a hammer. So, if you want to put in screws, you're going to use a hammer. If you're going to try to cut 2x4s, you're going to try to cut it with a hammer. In medieval Renaissance astrology, natal is one of four basic types of astrology. So, for example, you have horary, which looks at the chart of a question, and that says what's going to happen. Okay, that's what horary does. It tells us what's likely to happen and has a very, very narrow specific focus that allows us to have a very accurate, very precise reading because it's so narrow. And we basically do that by using a yes or no question. You can say, should I? Ultimately, the real root question typically is going to be, will I? Will it happen? So electional astrology, with electional astrology, it's not a question of whether something's going to happen or not. We've already decided to do something. We said, we're going to do this. I made a, I know I'm going to do it, and I need to have the most auspicious time astrologically to take action. And so that's what electional astrology does. And electional astrology, again, it's not lucky days. What it is a very specific time range on a specific date at a specific location. Okay? And so what that means is you may end up having 5 minutes. So it needs to be something you can control, something that you have the ability to. I mean, I typically, when I do elections, I'm saying, look, I need to have 24 hours, 7 days a week during the date range. I can't be limited to certain days or times. With electional, what you recognize is we have to conform to the heavens. We can't expect them to fit our schedule. And also, electional is not about, okay, I'm doing something anyway. Tell me it's going to be okay. Because typically the time that someone comes up with, they have a specific time and date, is not going to be auspicious astrologically. You have to sort of surrender to the astrology, surrender to the heavens, and if it's 3 o'clock in the morning, you get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and do whatever you got to do. Okay. So then natal. Like I said, people are used to this. This is astrology for everybody. You're looking at the birth chart. Now, what you need to recognize is, as compared to horary, because horary is so narrow and specific, it gives you a really accurate answer because it's narrow and specific. I mean, the other thing about horary then is, if you say, will I get the job at Y Corp? And it says no. You say, well, what about Z Corp? Not in the question. It's not going to tell you. It's limited to the Y Corp question. So again, that narrow focus means that you're only going to be able to know about, let's say, laser beam. Very narrow. Natal is sort of different from that. You're much more expanded focus. I mean, you've got a natal chart. That's going to tell you what's going to happen over your entire life. Okay? And so because you have the same natal chart when you're a newborn as you do when you're 90 years old, and yet you're very different from when you're a newborn and 90 years old, the chart has to be very broad, very flexible, and it just cannot be that precise over any particular issue. I mean, again, if you're thinking about relationships, every relationship you have in your life, every romantic relationship, every marriage or whatever, is going to be in the seventh house and the indicators that we look at, multiple indicators in a medieval Renaissance delineation. And so what that means is that if you're asking about a specific relationship, you're not going to be able to you're not going to be able to say what's happening with that relationship from the basic natal delineation. The other thing I would say is that modern astrology is very psychological. I mean, it focuses on sort of Jungian, on archetypes, psychology, and it does a very good job at that. I mean, I have to say this, something I really like. I do think that this idea that the heavens are providing a map of the psyche, that you can look at specific planets for specific drives and parts of the psyche. For example, sun is basic personality, moon is emotions, Mercury is thinking, and really get a sense of the person's psychology from that, I think is really brilliant. And I've definitely taken that on board in a sort of medieval Renaissance sort of way. What I do because I love psychology, like I said, I do a natal reading, I include psychology as, it's front and center there. What I'm looking at, though, is unlike a modern reading, which is very positive for the most part, very upbeat, I'm going to look at both negative and positive. And the medieval Renaissance astrology allows me to do that because we have this very full toolkit. We have essential dignities, we have all sorts of positive and negative factors, and then different strengths. So everything from very good to neutral to sort of bad to really bad can be seen in the chart. And what I'm able to do with the psychology is particularly I'm interested in seeing the shadow side. Okay? We can see the parts that people are proud of, the parts that they're positive. We can see that they show to the world, their face they show to the world. That shows up, and that's what you're going to get with modern. But also the shadow, the negative stuff, the stuff that we repress. That's part of us. It's extremely important to us, and it's very useful in a reading to see that. We're pretty much, the positive stuff we're in touch with. The negative stuff we often don't want to deal with. So again, I think it's very useful. And again, this is where the additional techniques that are available, the broader view that's available in medieval Renaissance comes in handy, even when we're doing a basic sort of modern psychological analysis. So let's just talk about some of the natal sort of delineation. I'm using a Lilly style. Lilly was a 17th century English astrologer, mostly well known for horary. He did natal as well, but when he did natal, he did sort of a horary approach. And a horary approach is going to be to focus on the house rulers, okay? So when you look at the natal chart, and like any chart, you're going to have the houses. The houses are going to show areas of life, areas that they're concerned with. In a horary election or a natal, you're all going to have the same basic framework that we're working with. The houses in a natal chart in modern are typically going to say, what do you feel about these areas? So for example, you look at the second house, what do you feel about money? What are your psychological issues with regard to money? What's your psychology around money? Medieval Renaissance is going to be, okay, how do you make money? How do you lose money? What areas are profitable for you? Are you going to make lots of profits? You're going to have lots of losses, that sort of thing. Much more concrete, not psychological. And also what's likely to happen, again, in a concrete way. However, again, both modern and medieval Renaissance natal share the fact that it's going to be in broad strokes, looking at your trends over your entire life. Now, this points up some other issues too. Again, in the modern, people say to me, well, there's no planets in the house, so we can't say anything about the house. It's like, apparently, and again, I'm not a super expert on modern. Apparently, if there's no planet in the house, then you're just sort of out of luck. You can't say anything about that house. Okay, in medieval Renaissance, again, our focus is going to be in the Lilly style on the house ruler. And there's always a house ruler. We can always see who that house ruler is, okay, what their basic, natural rulerships are, what their essential dignity is. Are they dignified? Are they weak? Are they afflicted? And what aspects they're making. And right off the bat, that's giving us a ton of information, as well as if there's any planets in the house. We'll look at that. So, for example, and now this differs a little bit from what I call the medieval style, Bonatti style. There, and this comes from the earlier Arabic astrology of the 8th and 9th century that kind of began. This is what we practice, but we have the Renaissance is sort of a variation of it, Renaissance and medieval. They had lots of idiosyncratic techniques for each area. So if you're looking at, the 10th house, you may have a whole different set of things that you're looking at as opposed to looking at the third house or the fourth house or whatever. So, but again, the main focus of my practice, again, in this Lilly style is going to be the house ruler. So let's take a look at wealth. Okay, wealth is second house. What with the native? Now the native is the person whose natal chart. See, it makes sense. It has nothing to do with natives or aborigines or something like that. That's the modern use of it. Native just means the person whose chart we're looking at. So it's useful to have that as a term. It's a term of art in astrology. That's all it means. So then what will the native profit from? What areas are sources of loss? How wealthy will they be? How poor will they be? Sort of a general sense of, their wealth. Okay, so what we're going to look at for wealth is, first of all, the second house ruler, and then like I said, who they are, what their essential dignity is, and then what aspects they're making. Then we're going to look at the planets in the second house. We're going to look, if there's something like the caput or cauda draconis, the tail of the dragon, the north and south node of the moon. We're going to look at that. Part of fortune. A lot of times with a part of fortune, what we're going to be looking at is the house placement, and then the ruler, is again the essential dignity of the ruler, and then Jupiter, who's a natural ruler of wealth. How dignified they are, what houses they rule, aspects. So that's giving us a lot of information. I mean, we've got multiple planets we're looking at, multiple indications. And again, one of the keys of medieval Renaissance astrology is we never judge on one testimony. Okay, we don't look at a single thing in the chart and then make some kind of prediction based on that. What we want to do is say, okay, let's look at multiple things and get an overall picture of it. What we're doing is we're seeing the patterning in the chart reflecting an underlying pattern. Okay, and it's never A equals B. You know, people ask me, what does the moon in the first house mean? It doesn't mean anything. It always depends on context, okay? And so it's like love. If you take the word love by itself, it doesn't have any meaning. You need to look in the context to see what that mean, what that's really talking about. So another thing we can do with and this is sort of one of those idiosyncratic techniques, it's a sort of Bonatti technique, that medieval, the technique that I use, is to look at the triplicity ruler of the sign on the second cusp, okay? And so the triplicity rulers then show life thirds, basically sort of childhood, the initial triplicity ruler, and then adulthood and then retirement. And we look at the state of those planets, and we can see if you're, for example, if you're afflicted and the first triplicity ruler is afflicted, then your childhood, you have financial problems in your childhood. If it's peregrine, the second triplicity ruler shows adulthood, so it's peregrine. It's going to say, okay, and sort of, you know, not doing so well, but not doing terribly in adulthood. And then if the third triplicity ruler is really dignified, it shows retirement. You're going to be doing great financially. Again, exactly what, you know, a third of your life depends on how long you live, right? And so exactly when childhood or adulthood are, and again, these planets, it's an overall broad indication. It doesn't mean for any particular, like this month, what I'm going to do, not going to be able to pick that up. So this is kind of, like I said, again, I want to emphasize that even in medieval Renaissance, which has many more techniques, has many more, you know, things that we can look at, we're still going to be getting a broad overview. You know, and people will say to me, like, it's typical of the psychology, for example, people say to me, well, yeah, I did have a problem with anger when I was younger, and now I don't have it so much. Well, that maybe they're fooling themselves, but it also may be true. I mean, maybe they have been through age, become wiser, then sort of been knocked around a little bit, and they've been able to deal with that. Nevertheless, it's not like that was wrong, because that is, you know, an underlying kind of constituent of their psyche. Okay, so that's another thing to think about. And you know, again, it's broad strokes. I mean, another thing to think about is this: is that if I'm, you know, if I'm a wealthy in a wealthy family, I'm a Rockefeller or something or whatever, you know, Elon Musk or children or whatever, and I have a kind of a crappy chart for finances, that means I'm going to be crappy for a billionaire. Okay, and so, and if I'm coming from this very poor background and I have a good chart, I'm going to be doing well for a poor person. I mean, it's very interesting. Like I said, look at Bill Gates' chart. I mean, for a while he's this richest man in the world. He's still super wealthy. And you look at his second house, it's good, but it's nothing incredibly spectacular. You know, and what we recognize is that the cycles that are showing the natal are taking place within these whole other cycles that are going on. Like I said, the horary is showing the little cycles, the most specific stuff, natal, and then you're thinking about, you know, your family, the country you're in, the overall world economy, things like that. You know, these are all working together. We're kind of looking at one band of it. And just, again, this idea that the natal is everything, and I look at the natal chart, it's going to tell me 100% what's going on. It's like there's a lot of other stuff that's going on, and it's just one piece of the puzzle. Interesting, useful, but it's definitely not going to give us the entire picture, give us 100% information about everything that's going on. So I want to talk a little bit about some specific issues having to do with natal charts. The first one I'm going to talk about is rectification, and I'm afraid I'm going to be, you know, again, this is just my opinion. You know, you don't have to buy into it. I'm not making an argument here. I'm just going to put forth what my views are. And again, there's going to be a lot of people, I'm sure, that disagree with me about this, but I'm going to put out this alternative view just so people are aware of it. If you don't like it, fine, that's no problem. You don't have to follow it. You know, again, I don't want to get into an argument about it, but so rectification. So what happens is, again, natal astrology to people is astrology. And so if people don't have their birth time, then they just freak out. They're like, okay, I can't do anything astrological at all. And for me, it's like, great, then you got horary. I mean, a lot of the questions that we have, horary is a much better predictor of, you know, of what's going to happen. Like, so am I going to get this job at X Corp? Horary is great for that. You look at your natal chart and you're like, well, you know, I mean, we'll talk a little bit about the timing techniques, but again, very difficult to say from a natal chart whether you're going to get a job at a particular company. You know, and that's just not something it's too broad. It's 30,000 feet. It's not giving us that kind of detail. But anyhow, people don't have their birth time. They like freak out. And so what the solution that's offered to that is rectification. So rectification is sort of backwards prediction. So instead of using the birth time in the chart, and you have a chart to predict the timing of events in your life, right? You can look forward to those events and predict based on since you already know the birth time. What you do is you look at the timing of events in your life and use that to predict the birth time. You're going backwards. Okay. I mean, that's an interesting idea. The problem with it is, this is the root problem with rectification, is there's absolutely no way to test. Okay? I mean, if you don't know your birth time and someone says, okay, it's 3 a.m., okay, you're like, okay, fine. I mean, and there's no way to know whether they just made that up or got it wrong or it's right on the nose or whatever. It's just completely, you have to basically just totally take it on faith. Now with horary, if you do a reading and someone says, I'm going to get the job at Y Corp, and you say yes, and then they don't get the job at Y Corp, then you know you got it wrong. But again, the rectification, there's no way to know whether you got it right or not. I mean, the other thing it sort of reminds me of is this is the same problem with past life astrology, okay? And I mean, I'm a Buddhist, so I accept reincarnation. I'm not questioning that there's previous lives. I mean, what the exact parameters of that is an interesting question, but there's no way to test it. I mean, again, someone could say, I was Cleopatra, and it's like, okay, how is there any way to really say whether that's true or not? So what I would say about the rectification is that to test whether someone could do rectification accurately, what you need to do is give them, say, 50 charts of unknown people, okay? And then have them, give them don't give them, I said, rather you take charts of 50 people, and then you give the person the events in their life, and they don't know who the person is, it's not a celebrity, and the astrologer looks at the events in their life and then tries to fit the birth time, okay? And you do that 50 times when the astrologer doesn't know the correct birth time, and then you check it against the charts. And if they're, 75% of the time, it's like, okay, that'd be pretty good. You still couldn't count on it though, because again, it's not 100%. So that's what I would say about rectification is that, I think that this is a situation where people are so desperate to have a birth time that this thing is created to give it to them, regardless of whether that's going to be accurate or not. And again, people's testing method for this is very subjective. They're like, well, I feel like a Pisces rising, no, I don't feel like, and I'm not Aries rising. That's not me. I'm a Pisces rising, and that's so subjective. That's just basically ludicrous to be deciding that it's accurate based on your subjective feeling about it. So that's what I would say about it. I think if you don't have you don't have your birth time, you don't have your birth time, you don't do natal. But again, from a Renaissance, medieval Renaissance perspective, not a big deal because you've got all that. You can do electional, you can do horary, you can do astrological magic. I mean, when I do checking talisman compatibility, the method I use, I just need the day, and then pretty much everybody has the day. I mean, it's interesting because I've had clients from Africa that don't even know what day they were born. In fact, they don't even know how old they are. I mean, because it's just not important. Whereas my clients from India, boy, they always have their times. I mean, that's important in their culture. So everybody's got their time of birth. So it's, it's a sort of a cultural thing. Maybe if astrology becomes bigger and more part of the culture, everyone's going to be, sure that they have their birth times. Again, it's one of those things. It's like, just because you don't have your birth time, it doesn't mean like I said, you can't use any astrology at all. Now, it kind of leads into another question, which is that, in reality, because people ask me, say, oh, my birth certificate might be off. And it's like, yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the thing even about a birth certificate is that, how accurate were they in getting it down? Now, you have problems also like Indiana, whether it's, standard time, whether Eastern Standard Time or whether it's Central Time. I mean, some of the time stuff can get really crazy in terms of the time changes and everything like that. That can be a problem too. So, basically, as long as you're within, say, 15 minutes or so, it's not a huge big deal for the overall natal. Now, if you're doing some stuff, these timing techniques, which I'm going to talk about a little bit, it needs to be to the minute. You're a minute off on your chart, and then it throws off all your rectification or whatever, your timing techniques, tremendously. Same problem with rectification. So, I have a kind of a laissez-faire attitude about it. I'm like, whatever. I mean, I'll just use whatever time you give me. People say it's between, 12:30 and 1. I'm like, all right, we're going to use 12:45. I'm kind of laissez-faire about it because, again, the reality is we think we have this precision and we actually don't. And you can still get a lot of information out of the natal chart. And there's also this weird phenomenon of using the wrong chart and getting the right answer. That was the appropriate thing for the time. So maybe rectification works on a similar thing. I mean, again, I think that it's being sold as this is some scientific technique. It's not just, making it up intuitive. So, but interesting. all sorts of stuff to think about. Now, the next issue is the timing techniques. So because the only thing that people have available is natal astrology, they're going to use it for everything, right? And so really like what's going to happen in the next year? What's going to happen in the next 6 months? And what's going to, should I, will I marry this particular person? You're always going to be looking at the natal chart. So what people do is they'll take the basic natal chart and then use these various timing techniques. So typically transits or solar returns or progressions or whatever. And so the inherent problem with this is trying to take something that's inherently imprecise as a natal chart that, like I said, must fit over your entire life. So it's got a lot of flexibility and give, and it's not going to be that detailed, and get some detailed information about it. I mean, it's like taking an aerial picture from 30,000 feet and blowing it up so you can see a blade of grass. It's just, you're really going to have problems doing that. The other problem is that, again, people are typically using one or two techniques, just transits or just slow returns or whatever, just progressions, and trying to time based on that. In medieval Renaissance, they had a ton of natal timing techniques, but they never judged it on one testimony. They used multiple ones together. And you can see like in the second house when they did that would do that with timing techniques. So for example, medieval Renaissance timing techniques, primary directions, perfections, Verdaria, solar revolutions and returns, transits are all used together. And the transits are basically used as the final technique, sort of a triggering, that once there's all these primary directions and perfections and solar returns going on, that the transit would be then timing it. And it's incredible the depth. I mean, if you look at Lily's Christian Astrology in the natal section, there's a huge amount of stuff there. And I guess what I would say about it is that my experience for me personally was I could never get it to work accurately enough. And now part of that comes from the fact that I initially trained as a horary astrologer and my expectation of accuracy was really high. I mean, horary is very precise and very accurate, and I just don't think it's possible to get that kind of level of accuracy with natal very easily. I mean, I wouldn't rule out the possibility, but it's going to take someone who's very experienced using medieval Renaissance, and it's just someone who's very intuitive as well. So there are people working on these medieval Renaissance natal timing techniques. I know Ben Dykes is teaching it, so I think that, and looking at some of the stuff, I had discussions with a student who was also a student of Ben Dykes, and I was really blown away by the intensity and the level of of technique that they were putting to it. But again, they're using multiple things together. Okay, and sort of what I was able to offer them was saying, make sure you're working with unknown charts. Okay, don't be doing celebrity charts. Don't be doing ones you already know the answer. Look at charts of unknown people and see what kind of predictions you can make, and make it in writing in advance with an unknown chart. Note the astrological factors you've done, and then see what the outcome is. And that's really the gold standard for any kind of divination. I mean, even if you're a psychic, write it down. Write down the prediction when you're predicting something you don't know the answer, and then see what the results are, and then just keep checking yourself. And that way we keep ourselves honest. Because a lot of what's happening is, again, reassurance stuff. I'm freaked out, and then they say it's okay, and we don't check the accuracy of it. We're looking at Hitler's chart. Oh, look at the, progressed sesquiquadrate galactic vertex on the, date of the Normandy invasion, and that proves it. Again, it doesn't do anything when you already know the results. It's like playing hide and seek and watching the person hide. I mean, I'm really great at hide and seek. I'm practicing hide and seek. You're not, okay? This is not practice. It has nothing to do with actual prediction. So again, not very popular. But that's what I would say about it, is that I think that, I know this is really going to be, that people are not going to like it, either the rectification or the timing stuff, because that's so embedded. But I think a lot of it is coming from the fact that people want it, so we're just going to do it regardless of whether there's any accuracy of it anyway. And then accuracy and prediction is not something that's really, this is not a high priority in reality than might say it is in modern astrology. I mean, a lot of modern astrology is about reassuring people everything's going to be okay, and then giving ourselves a false sense of control that we think it's no. Oh, that's Mercury retrograde. Again, we have no idea what the causality is, and we can't predict it in advance. So, like I said, at the same time, when I look at modern natal and I look at the psychology, I really feel like that is a tremendous advance. And as I said, if we go and fast forward 200 years or 500 years from now, I think that the real contribution of 20th and 21st century astrology is going to be the psychological natal astrology. I think it's an incredible tool. I use it myself. And I think it gives an incredible window into people's psyche. So again, that's positive there. So again, I just kind of want to offer this stuff as sort of my perspective. It's idiosyncratic. Again, a lot of stuff people aren't going to be wild about it. But there's also the sense of, again, what ties together these videos is practicality. Like, let's be aware of what's really going on. Let's understand what we can do and we can't do. Let's not be fooling ourselves and using this as, like I said, just a way to reassure ourselves or to give ourselves a pat on the back because I'm such a brilliant astrologer, but to actually do prediction. And I think that's the way forward. And, whatever method you're using, as long as you are being honest with yourself, that, like I said, you're giving the prediction in advance in writing, listing the astrological factors about a situation you don't know the outcome, and then when the outcome comes up, you check it, then again, it doesn't matter what technique you're using because you're going to be on the right track. You're going to be able to see how accurate it is in terms of prediction, and that's really going to keep you together. So again, like I said, all my opinion. If you don't like it, that's okay. Go ahead and do your thing. But I just thought I would put that out there, and just sort of again my thoughts about the practical uses and practical implications of natal astrology.